evening, everyone. Welcome to the American Library. I'm Grant Rosenberg, the programs manager, and you all know this guy right here.
Mr. Jimmy Buffett. I'll introduce him in a moment, but as usual, I want to thank you all,
Those of you who made donations tonight, which really assist us in putting on our programming and providing the wine and snacks and other costs that we have, along with some funding from the Annenberg Foundation. I see some new faces out there, and I hope you will consider joining the library. Even out-of-towners, I know there are some of you from out of town. You can even become what we call sustaining members from out of Paris. This library is a fine institution, and if it's good enough for Jimmy Buffett, it's good enough for the rest of us. And events like tonight's would not be possible without the rest of the library staff and volunteers and interns, so I'd like to thank them very much. A few words. Yes, please, applause for the staff. I really like this energy so far. This is very good. And the wine that you are drinking tonight comes from the Paris Wine Company, run by Joshua Adler, who is here tonight, with his colleague Francesca Hampton. And when we announced the event tonight with Jimmy, Josh told me a story the other day that I think is worth sharing to kind of get us into the evening. And I quote, "Once I was hitchhiking through the desert in Arizona and got picked up by a leathery skinned guy in a rusty 4x4 who had at least two guns in his car. He put on a Jimmy Buffett tape and he told me, 'I like listening to Jimmy Buffett because when you feel good, he makes you feel real good. And when you feel bad, he makes you feel real bad.'" No, it's not so bad. But I think lots of folks have stories about listening to Jimmy, even casual fans. I grew up staring at the cover of Volcano in my parents' collection, sandwiched in between the Beatles' Help and Carole King's Tapestry. And later I got to know his music better when my college roommate, who grew up in Key West, made Jimmy's songs a large part of our dorm room soundtrack. James William Buffett was born on Christmas Day 1946 in Pascagoula, Mississippi. He grew up in Mobile and Fairhope, Alabama, and has a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Southern Mississippi. After graduating, I just learned this, he worked as a correspondent for Billboard magazine in Nashville. And then he started recording and things changed. He put out albums beginning with Down to Earth in 1970, White Sport Coat and Pink Crustacean, A1A, Changes in Latitudes, Changes in Attitudes in 77, Son of a Sailor, and other hits through the 70s that yielded those songs that even non-fans know and can sing. He's now released some 30 albums in all, and along the way he's become a restaurant chain owner, a successful novelist, and a man who tours like the Grateful Dead. And like the Dead, he has his dedicated fans known as... At the end of our conversation, we will open the floor for some questions, and maybe if we're lucky, he'll play that guitar a little bit that's behind him. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, parent heads, Mr. Jimmy Buffett.
I didn't get a display.
It's right there. You've got some books all over them.
Oh, okay, I just wanted to...
And when it's the 60th
I like your
anniversary.
marketing.
I would like to begin by talking about France. You have several songs about Paris, about Marseille. You tour here often. You lived here a bit on Rue du Dragon, I learned. What is your relationship to France, its country, and people?
It's funny because, first of all, it's just simply an honor to be here. As a history major, I still try to keep up with history, and because it's obviously repeating itself. And it started with me growing up on the Gulf Coast, which was French settled. You know, I grew up I was born in Pascagoula, and ironically enough, I was there last Saturday, and it's kind of, I do have, something happens and funny stories come along, so I do kind of shy away from honors and things like that because I just see myself as a working performer, and I just like to keep going forward, and whatever's back there has happened. It's great, it's fun, but I seldom do look back, and but my hometown was kind of in a little bind after Hurricane Katrina, so they honored me, and they were going to name the bayou after me. It was where this gets good because my grandfather was a sailor ship captain, and I would always go down and visit because both of my sisters are here, and they actually flew business class, which is cool because they're now. I tell them spend it now. But I had no brothers. I had cousins down there, so Pascagoula was where I grew up on the Gulf Coast, and so my grandfather was a sailing ship. A captain of a steamship. He started as a sailing ship captain, but he would take me down to this little bayou, and he said, from this little bottle of water, if you have an adventurous soul like we think you do, you can start here and you can go anywhere in the world. And so you cut to 50 years later, they were going to have this great ceremony to name this Buffett Bayou. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. I like a bayou. And then there was a nice lady from the Pascagoula Historical Society did some digging. Not in the bayou, but at the records, and discovered that the bayou had indeed been named for Jean-Baptiste in the 1700s when the French first came to Pascagoula. So I was not going to get into it with John the Baptist. So we compromised, and I got a bridge. So Buffett Bridge and they spelled it right with 2 T's. And so I was actually in Pascagoula last Saturday, went to New Orleans and flew directly from New Orleans to Paris, which was incredible because that was the song line that I always dreamed about. Because growing up in a French culture on the Gulf Coast, 20 miles north of Mobile or Pascagoula or Pas Christian or New Orleans was redneck Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. And we were scared of those people. I was Jesuit raised, and it was a very Catholic and French culture. So that's where my love of the joie de vivre came from. And my grandmother's side of the family were Acadian, and my grandfather's side came from Newfoundland, and he married the daughter of the sailing boarding houses owners, and that's how this whole thing started. So in my early years, when you're eating gumbo and crawfish étouffée and you're listening to music, and that was all about what we did as a family, and the names of the places you went to were obviously French. It all got into me, and New Orleans in those days was, what it is still today. It's an amazing surviving place, which was the cultural center to me of my region where I grew up. Now, I went to school with a lot of people, any of you from the South, that they would go out, and I wasn't looking into getting into the business world. When I discovered the guitar, I went in an opposite direction, which led me to New Orleans because the French Quarter was there. So, and I wanted to be a bohemian, and I wanted to do that stuff. And so that's where it all started. And from there, for all the times, Paris was always, Paris was like the Pleiades. It was out there, and I don't know how I was going to get there, but I did. So, and when I did, I fell in love with it years ago, and then wound up on my song line down. I wound up living in St. Bartholomew for the past 30 years in the French Antilles, and learning to speak a little French. But the culture was just the same. Music was a part of it, and food was a part of it, and joie de vivre is something that everybody who doesn't understand it ought to. So that's how I got to Paris.
Can you tell us a bit about the early years when you just began playing music after you're working at Billboard, and what those early years of getting that success were like?
Well, the thing of it is, you have to be a bit of a narcissist if you're going to actually make this jump. It's like creativity, as Mark Twain said, is only undetected plagiarism. So, it was my editor, and so she gave me a line that said, "Leap and the net will appear," and that was me. I would jump out of anything, and hope that I landed, and So if you're thinking like that, you're thinking a lot differently than other people. So that's what carried me through those first days. But the funny thing about it is as being a shameless performer, you got to start in the shower, because I would sing Elvis songs and look in the mirror and I'd sing along and I go, well, that sounds pretty good. And you start there, so you're your first audience, you're your first everything. And then if you really want to pursue this, then you go out and then you got to make a decision, and that's when you leap. And so, thank God when the first time I left and wanted to do this, the great thing about my mom and dad were they never were opposed to it. I don't think they liked it that much, and there were incidences that I can remember that I really thought I might have to go back to church and go to confession when they caught me. But they were always encouraging me to do something like that. I figured I could at least go out, I could sail a boat, I could navigate and play the guitar. I could do okay, but I was going south. I was going on my grandfather's route somewhere down into the Caribbean, and so that was always what I thought I would do. So when I decided to go out and play, hootenanny nights for the things you got up on, or free mic night now is what they call them. But so you get up there and you weren't being paid. There were obviously many more talented people than you who actually had jobs, and but so that's where you started. But I was pretty fearless about it because I had my own audience. But they don't last forever, and I always tell people when I do lectures back in music schools and back in the States that, your first audiences are your mother and her 4 friends that she can coerce into going to see her son, and they'll go for like 2 shows, and then your ass is on your own, and that's where it happens. So that's what And you just have to, it's a commitment that I know a lot of people in any walk of life make to something that's like that. You commit yourself to that. I had plan B if it didn't work out, and it wasn't bad. I could get a boat. I was going to stay warm, and I was going to those islands that I'd always heard about or read about through my grandfather and the books that I'd read. And being in the libraries it's a great thrill to me because all my life I went to the library, and that's where today I wrote in the books out here. There's a great saying: without geography you're nowhere, but to me without your books you're nobody. And I still believe that. So it's such an honor to be here. That those first years they start like that, and then if you've got a commitment to do it, you just keep working. And that's what I did, and I just kept working, and it was actually fun along the way, and success wasn't anything I was looking at. I just did it to meet girls. And, I was a shy Catholic altar boy, and I went off to Auburn University, and they threw me in a dormitory with a guy named Johnny Youngblood, who's just getting out of jail now. I'm going to see him. But it was like one of those fraternity, sorority things, and I didn't want to go to the school, and I wasn't having a good time, but this guy was playing the guitar, and these girls were digging it. And so I wound up being his roommate. They put me in the room, and I went, "How'd you do that?" He said, "Well, I only know 3 chords." I said, "Teach me those chords." And a month later, I had his job. So that's honestly how the whole thing started. And once that happened, I didn't want to do anything else.
You're well known for, I guess, what we call big tent songs, like Cheeseburger in Paradise, Volcano, Margaritaville, part of what's known in your concerts as the Big 8. But a lot of your songs, such as In the Shelter, West Nashville Grand Ballroom Gown, to take 2 examples, are very character-specific tales of folks not like the persona that you may have to the general public. Are there any songs that you have written that you really love, maybe smaller songs that you wish people sang with the same enthusiasm as Margaritaville?
Well, I think Yeah, there are songs that I really like, but I don't force people to listen to what I want them to hear. If they're a paying customer, they get to hear what they want to hear. That's the difference between being shameless and being stupid. Go up and reinvent your career in front of a sold-out audience, and decide you're going to change your name and be a jazz performer when you've had 10 hit records. I'd call that a stupid decision. But I learned that on Bourbon Street because that's where I really learned to be a performer. And I wish I was a better guitar player, and I'm not that good a singer, but I could run the band, and I liked it. Because the reason that I could is because at the same time I worked in the shipyard, and I had credit at the music store. And so I bought the sound system for the first band, and I went, well, I'm not going to let those guys tear up my sound system. So I announced that it was kind of like a dictator in Haiti. I just said, I announced that I am the leader of the band. And I've run it pretty well for the last 45 years. It's just what you learn to do, but along with that, the songs that people want to hear, they get to hear because, as you said, you call them the ages. I call them the 12 songs you play or get killed. And, but my audiences are so appreciative. There's plenty of room to do what you want to do. First of all, I never realized I'd still be doing this at 68. I thought 10 years I'd buy a big boat, go to St. Bart's, get a beach bar, call it Cheeseburger Paradise, and live happily ever after. I still get to do that, but things are a little better than that. So when you start doing it like that, the songs were written, they came from the fact that I think my mother always wanted me to be a serious writer from the South. We have lineage in Mississippi of some pretty good writers, but I wasn't challenged, and I wasn't that focused on that being something I wanted to do. I was having a real good time playing on Bourbon Street. And the interesting thing about it, out of that good time came amazing characters who wound up in those kind of songs you talked about that I really like. He Went to Paris to me is one of my favorite songs, which was written about a guy I met while touring who was the cleanup guy in Chicago who fought in the Spanish Civil War and lost his arm. Well, I made him lose an eye, but that's that's poetic license. But everything is either it's either based on people you know, or I make it up, and then it's up to you to figure it out. And I'm not telling.
I've seen your music described as island escapism, Gulf and Western, a mix of rock, country, folk, Caribbean, drunk rock. How do you describe it?
I'm a folk singer, and that's what I always was. And then I'm a folk singer who then discovered the Beatles, and that's about it. And then James Taylor, and then other compatriots of mine that came along, and Joni Mitchell, people I was fortunate enough to meet and work with, who I idolize. You always have to idolize somebody out there, as a performer, that is. And so, but along with it, living in New Orleans, and the first time that I got to come to France, what happened along the way was great material to put in songs. And songs are much, much easier to write than prose or poetry, I find. And when I started attempting to write books, I went, damn, this is hard. It's lonely. I mean, that's why I have such respect for great writers, because of the loneliness. But I'm a happy guy. So, when I would get down, like writing, when I was working on a book or something, and I was going, I got to get out of here, I could go down to the bar, pick up the guitar, and go play, and people liked me, and I'd go back up. That felt good. I'll go back and work. But that's just a unique situation. So, along the way, all the songs came out of interesting places. Death of an Unpopular Poet is one of my favorites, and I'm a huge Kenneth Patchen admirer, and that was about him when he died. And the first time I came to France, I started learning French listening to Georges Brassens and his folk songs, a gorille, those songs like that. So, you pick up along the way. You know, if you're listening and not talking, you learn a lot more. And I always listen to stories or to events or read the paper, and they always usually wound up in my songs.
Over the last 30, 40 years, how has your approach to songwriting changed? Is it the same way that you worked in the early 70s now?
No, it's I take more time after I wrote books. I wrote Margaritaville in 6 minutes. 3 minutes in Austin, and then I got on the plane and flew back to Key West, and I finished it in Key West. That song works pretty good. And you don't know, you never know, but Michael Nesmith, who I'm a great admirer of back in the days when he was more than a monkey, he just said to me once, you know, every now and then, if you're lucky enough, you can put your thumb on the pulse of the population. And when you do that, you know, you're one of the luckiest people on the planet, and that's what I feel I am. I'm just lucky that that little song struck a chord that went beyond anything I would possibly imagine. And it truly, but it was written, it was a hot day in Austin, and I had a friend of mine I was getting, because I couldn't get work in Florida, but I lived in Key West, and I'd have to go to Texas and work at coffee houses, and this was when I was working by myself. And so a friend of mine took me to this little Mexican restaurant, and we had lunch. It was hot, and so we had a couple of margaritas. Then she drove me to the plane, and I went, man, that was tasted good. And I started it, and we had to go to the plane, and then I'd get off the plane in Miami, and I'd drive the overseas highway to Key West, and on the 7 Mile Bridge there was a traffic accident, and I was stuck for an hour, and I finished the song on the bridge. And I went home and I went, hey, this is pretty good. And but nobody knew, I didn't know. And so, though, you know, the ones that make the lasting impressions, you know, are, I can't say that it's not my favorite song, because I wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing without it, but I like other things equally as much that haven't got as much notoriety.
You mentioned that.
Can I have some more of this lovely Paris wine coming? Thank you for the That's great.
You mentioned your novel writing. How did you come to start writing prose? And what is that process like for you, aside from just slower and lonelier?
I did it for my mother, because she loved me. I wanted to write a book. I started doing short stories because I loved reading short stories. And it was the challenge simply of doing it. Can I do this, and can I pull this off, and will it be good enough to do anything? And I'd always read stories. Oh, thanks. Can I just look at the red? Somebody covered it. Okay. From Lando. Okay. Oh, thank you. This could go long. What was that question?
It's something about wine. Writing it out.
It takes a long time, and so again, in Key West, if you're just following your songline, I'm a huge believer in the Bruce Chapman philosophy of following the songline. I loved his book, Songlines, because I'll do a lot of traveling, and I'm in Australia a lot, and there's magic. There's some magic there you just simply can't explain, which is what creativity is all about. If we could explain what we do, we wouldn't be here, and that I love the magic of it. So when the book idea came along, I just wanted to see and test myself if I could go right, and I was terrible, because I'm very stream of conscious. I will just go on and on and on, and I can never come back to the point. And then that's where great editors come in to being. There's a lady named Bonnie Ingber who I started with children's stories, and my daughter, my oldest daughter, and I wrote a book called Jolly Mom, and I thought, you know, this is after, you know, watching Sesame Street, and then I got to go on, and I did a Muppet show, and then I got to do Hey Mr. Spaceman with Elmo and Gonzo. So, you know, watching the Muppets with my daughter, I loved the Muppets, and Jim Henson was from Mississippi, another, you know, And so it was an attempt to do it, and I had a great editor, and she said yes, and then we did it, and they were pretty successful. So from children's books, I just thought it's like, as a pilot, I always, just wanted to fly one little seaplane, and I never thought about anything with more than one propeller. But I fly jets now. I don't know why, but I had to keep going, and I had, whatever that is, I had to keep working on something that was a little more of a test to do, and see if I was any good at it. And that was the way it was with working on the book. So I was living in Key West, and there was a great actor, and his name was Philip Burton. And Philip Burton actually adopted Richard Burton. He was Richard Burton's. He had adopted Richard Burton and he was from Wales. And then Philip Burton actually worked for the BBC, and then started the Shakespearean Company in England. And he retired in Key West. So I was lucky enough. Somebody introduced me to him. And I would go over and just sit at his house and listen and read the things that he would do. And I loved Shakespeare as a kid, and I was a terrible student, but I made A's in English literature because I liked Shakespeare. And I liked The Merchant of Venice, and I liked all the comedies. Tragedy, but I liked the comedies. So I spent like a whole year with Philip Burton, and he would just almost like a teacher. And I was working on my first book, and I wanted a villain. You have to have a villain, and so I knew Richard III. Duh. So I went over to Philip, and so I would just sit there and talk to him about how I would make a villain in the first book. He's retired. This great fountain of knowledge is in Key West. I'm sitting there kind of working in and out, trying to do the first book, and I've got him as a mentor. From there, I bounced to Herman Wouk. Now, how I get to Herman Wouk? In the middle of this, a friend of mine who's in Washington, D.C., who was a promoter named Jack Boyle, on the cellar door. If any of you are from the D.C. area that knew that, yeah. And I worked there many times for him, and he's a still promoter. But he came to me and said, yeah, Don't Stop the Carnival. I said, of course, because by that time I had a boat, and I was in the Caribbean. By that time living, I might have been in St. Bart's, the British Virgin Islands, but he said, Don't Stop the Carnival would make a great musical. And he told me that, because I knew that when we were sailing around, everybody that I knew at that time, and this is way before internet, way before VHSs, when you went out on the ocean by yourself, you had limited amount of space, and maximum use of minimum space is what sailing is all about. And for your entertainment, we had music, we had a guitar, you had a certain number of books you could take, and Don't Stop the Carnival, and White Sport Coat and Pink Horse Station, and Catch a Fire were on every boat that I ever knew. And so there, I thought I was in good company. Herman Wouk, Bob Marley, and me, I went, okay, I'm in now. But it actually was true, so. And I love that book so much that I wound up drunk one night and bought a hotel in St. Bart's. And Pamash. And so I was so into this thing, and then the hotel became, our experience of running this hotel in St. Bartholomew in 1981 was, I went, why didn't I read it? Why didn't I listen to this? So, along the way, I sent a letter to a friend of mine who's in the movie business. I said, I want to just try to buy the rights to Don't Stop the Carnival, because I'm thinking about doing it as a musical. Yeah, right. I sent a note to Herman Wouk. He answered me back. He said, well, thank you very much for your letter, but I don't know who you are. And I wrote him a letter back, and I said, well, thank you for answering, because I thought you were dead. That's a true story. And he invited me to Palm Springs to talk about it. Long story short, I gave this out. I said, I'd just like to buy the rights. He said, well, I'm not doing anything. He said, I've always loved this story, and I'll write the libretto. And I went, you will? And so, long story short, we did Don't Stop the Carnival as a musical, but in the meantime, I had to, to this point, he's 100 years old today. I'm seeing him next week. Herman Wouk's 100 and alive and well and still kicking. And he's, one of my mentors. The luck of having that come into my life, it's one of the greatest things that ever happened to me. Just for the experience of somebody with that much wisdom at times when I needed it, telling me how full of shit I really was. and honesty. And I'm sitting there spinning plates. He's going, just tell me. Okay. So between Philip Burton and Herman Wouk, and the one thing Herman told me is I was working on the book. He said, it's a page a day. And I'd get up there and start working and stuff. And he said, just get one page, a good page a day. Don't go long. He said, and just count it up, Jimmy. At the end of a month, if you get a good page a day, you got 30 pages. Start doing the multiplication after that. And that was one of the greatest gifts that I ever got. And that's when I knew I could attempt to write a book. And the first one I wrote, and then I started doing the business side of it. I said, well, if I'm selling 500,000 records here, there's at least 100,000 people who will buy this. If it's any good, I could even sell a few more. So that shameless promoter got into it, but what started was the discipline that Herman gave me, and that's the way I still write.
I should note that he has signed the books that we have in our collection, not just his name. There are entire messages to the next people who...
That's all stream of conscious thing.
Yeah, I didn't read them yet, but it's a long message, personal messages to library members. So take care of them if you take out the books.
Don't steal those books. You'll burn in hell if you steal them.
I do want to ask you a bit more about Key West, because after Hemingway and Tennessee Williams, Thomas McGuane, who's your brother-in-law.
My brother-in-law.
You kind of put
my sister back there is married to that writer. That's Larry McGuane back there. That's the woman behind the great author.
Well, you kind of, in addition to those people, you've kind of put Key West on the map, especially in the 70s, the sense of sexual freedom, drug running, fishing. Hopes for a hippie.
What's going on? I am shocked.
Kind of this hope for a hippie utopia, easy living, that kind of thing. Can you paint a picture of what Key West was like for real in the 70s? Because it seems to me it's idolized like Paris in the 20s.
Exactly that. You know what? There's a great comparison, because I've read everything about Paris in the 20s, and you're in Key West, and in those days it was when I got there in 1972, it was still a Navy town. There was a not a big, but a very kind of literate and kind of artistic gay community. There were drug smugglers, and then there were conks, which were the local pirates that would steal anything that was not nailed down, because that was their heritage of being wreckers. And I loved landing in the middle of that. And then, as you said, I actually used to play Tennessee Williams' pool parties. That they were interesting. When I first got there, because Tennessee Williams loved Hank Williams. And a friend of mine who eventually became our partner in our first business, we opened our store and our bar there, worked at this restaurant, and then Tennessee Williams' boyfriend, Bill Glavin, at the time, worked there, and Bill Glavin introduced me to Tennessee, and I'd go play, and all he wanted to hear was Hank Williams songs. And I'd play Hank Williams songs in Tennessee Williams' pool party. And I went, this is Key West. And then that was going on, and then Tom came in, and then Jim Harrison, Russell Chatham, and Gat Schwartzberg. So there was this whole influx of these crazy guys that I just loved being around as writers, but they were all writers, but there was really no music in Key West at that time. I mean, there were a couple of bars that had it, but what's going on now I think is great. The people have seized upon that, and now they have songwriting festivals, and people go out there, they're looking for it, and I hope they find it. I mean, I did, and I think anybody can find another Key West or something like that, but that particular period, I don't want to sound like somebody going that far back, but it was something. And that's what I think You know, when you read about Paris in the 20s, it had to be something like that. But we had marijuana. And we weren't drinking ourselves to death. So, and that trade provided more stories and input that still, the proper story, in my humble opinion, has not been told about what was really going on there. But it was so vibrant, and to the point, that's where I decided to start the Coral Reefer Band, and I rehearsed in a garage at a friend of mine's house. He had a leather hat business at a gas station, and I rented the back room, and we started the Coral Reefer Band. But on the first show we ever did, and we had a band, we played a place called Logan's Lobster House in Key West. It was $1 a ticket, and in the front row, in the front table, was Truman Capote, Tennessee Williams, Dodson Rader, and David Wachowski, and John Malcolm Brennan. And I knew all these guys just from, you met them because it was that kind of place, and yeah, it was utopian in a way, you wish that the rest of the world could experience that, and it must have been what Paris was like in those days. So, and I knew then I would never leave. Either I might leave physically, but I would never leave spiritually or mentally from there, and I still go back, and it's it's changed. But Jim Harrison said once, "You never live anywhere that people don't tell you that 10 years ago it was better." And so those days were, but I was the only singer, so I was the guy who sang at the parties.
I want to leave some time for questions from all of you, so I've got one more question. Because of your incredibly loyal fan base, it seems that you've earned more from touring than from record sales, at least now. And today in 2015, that's how all musicians have to make money, because of piracy and streaming. As a self-described pirate, particularly the song "A Pirate Looks at 40", I want to quote the lyrics, but I don't think I can do that right now. What do you think of piracy, streaming, in the music industry today, and how it's changed?
The music business, like the publishing business, like the art business, is never set up for the artist to make any money. They count on your passion for your work and your ability to destroy yourself at an early age. That's the honest thing to me. And how I avoided that was partially by accident, but along the way, the only legitimate job but granted you, I had a double major. So I had a history major and I was a journalism major too. So that plays into it, because I was struggling in Nashville, and I literally answered an ad in the Nashville Banner for a reporter for a newspaper, and it was Billboard magazine. And I mean, that's probably hard to conceive at this time, that they put a want ad in the Nashville Banner for a reporter, but they did. And I answered, and I'd been knocking on doors trying to get somebody to listen to my songs, because I just wanted to be a writer. And the strange thing about Nashville in those days, coming out of New Orleans and being, at that time, I knew I was a pretty fair entertainer. I thought, well, while I'm doing this and trying to make it big, I can at least work in a bar. There was no music in bars in Nashville, and when I went there in 1974, I couldn't get a job in Ireland Steakhouse. I mean, it was like, which was odd to me. So I had to get a real job, and luckily enough, Born on Christmas, this showed up. So I went from 1 week knocking on doors, getting rejection after rejection for songs that I was trying to pitch, to working for Billboard magazine, where people sent me free records, and I had an expense account, and I could go in at night and use their Watts line to call my girlfriend. My life changed, and the greatest thing was, the editor, Bill Williams, he taught me what the music business really was, and how stacked it was against the artists. And he knew, because he was a reporter for Billboard, but he knew that town and everything about it. We'd go out at night, and he would tell me. And that saved me from the fact that I knew then, whatever was going on, you better take care of your own business. And we're not, in any art form, are we ever steered, very rarely are you steered by somebody into telling you the honest truth about what you're facing out there. All you want is, for me, I just wanted my picture on an album cover. And then and at that point, I didn't even have my own bin, and I was BU, BA, Burt Bacharach was way up front. And I didn't have a bin, so I would go in the store check, and if I found my album, I'd stick it in the front of the B-bin, you know? But that's the way it really was. And so Nashville in that time taught me about what was really involved, and I knew that I had to take control of it, and I knew that they were set up to steal your money, or you signed a basic indentured servitude contract for 7 years, and so they, you know, the odds were you'd either die or you'd get, you know, even if you lived, and they might up you an ante, but they knew the prices were fixed, they were set, but nobody else that I knew who was an artist knew this, but my guy Bill Williams explained how it worked to me. So what I really did is I said, well, I don't understand math that much, but I know that I can have my own money as a performer while I try to pursue this record thing. And that's what I did. I became what I hope to be the best live performer that there was. And I made a lot of money doing that, and I did not have to depend not on the kindness of strangers, but on the kindness of crooks. Because it was all set up against you. They would have your publishing, they would have your mechanicals. So guess what? They sell the record business on a stupid move to Steve Jobs, in my humble opinion. The album business, as we know it, is over. So what do? Now they're in the live performance business. Well, I had that thing covered 20 years ago. So I conveniently bowed. I never sued anybody. I did all my contractual obligations, and I left because they offered me a huge deal for a lot of money to re-sign, which again, they were going to raise the price of the album so to make my fans pay for my big bonus. And I went, I think there's a better way out of here. And my great manager, Howard Kaufman, had it. And at that point, 12 years ago, we quietly left the record business and sold direct retail. And that's kind of the model that people are trying to get to now. But that said, technology to me brings something into it. You still have to be, if you're a performer, totally committed, as passionately as you can, to play and be on stage and find people, physical bodies that come in and will listen to you. And then from that, you can generate, with this incredible technological advances we have, you can find your audience then. But if you're a shitty performer, good luck. Because it ain't going to happen unless you still do the hard work initially that it takes to get there. So when I go do lectures to people like that, I find kids that there's still no easy way to do it. And a lot of people think there is. All you got to do is get a website, put your songs up there. There's a lot of bad music up there. You know, and one of the things about it, even though they were crooks and they were stealing your money, they had some people working there that had good ears and made great music. If anybody's seen Muscle Shoals, the documentary that's out there, if you haven't seen it, I suggest you do, because it's an amazing story, just like what happened there, because talent still and content is still king. And if you can create stuff, you know, it's still, there's, whatever the technology is, they still need us. And that's what I try to tell kids out there. But be smart about it, and if you can, work for yourself so that you can be yourself, and not take the bait and get thrown into the tank with the rest of the tuna. Stay out there and swim.
Thanks, Jimmy Buffett.
Yeah. I called Grant late today, and he was kind enough to get my family in here today, and I told him that we're so excited to see you. My wife and I have seen you about 15, 20 times, but my assistant has seen you 108 times. Wow. And the number 100th was in Louisville, Kentucky, our home, and at the Yum Center there, and we had a big RV and everything. But I just want to say thank you for all the great times.
No, thank you. You know, people ask me, do you ever get sick of playing Margarita? Do you ever sick of going up there? That's the stupidest question I could ever ask. Are you kidding? Look at this job I got. You know, and it's because of people like you, and I'm glad that whatever I do brings a little bit of joy into your life, and because you certainly bring a lot into mine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Oh, you're the moderator. Okay, excuse me. I'm sorry.
Certainly.
Yeah, I wanted to know your reaction to the work that was done in L.A. by the Wrecking Crew. You know, Glenn Campbell was a member of the Wrecking Crew.
Yeah.
They did all that music for the front of these bands
Right.
who became famous. We all thought we were listening to the Monkees, when in fact it wasn't the Monkees playing.
Right.
Right?
Well, that was the way it ran. You know, it was like the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. You know? I mean, the Beach Boys. Did you see the Beach Boys movie? Glenn Campbell played Brian Wilson. They went on tour to Japan, and the Japanese didn't know the difference. I mean, but it was that way because, you know, the Wrecking Crew were paid studio musicians. At that point, you couldn't bring your band. They had their guys who worked, and they knew what was going on. How blaming those guys? The Beach Boys were actually, Brian Wilson should get a lot more credit for that because he was the one that said no. And then you got Pet Sounds and you got all of that. So it was very regimented at that point. They had their guys who did their version of You. Nobody cared about who went on tour. They could put, you know, what is, I love, the newest one is Journey. When Steve Perry left Journey, they went on YouTube and got a Filipino guy that sounds exactly like him. They revived their entire career in the Pacific. You know? I mean, so it's kind of, as I said, history repeats itself, you know? But you go to Hawaii and Journey sells out for like 15 shows with this cool little Filipino guy doing Steve Perry. You're like, God damn, he sounds like Steve Perry. But it was the same thing, that it was made in the studio, and live performance wasn't what record companies were into then, until the money ran out. Yes, sir.
First, thank you very much for coming. And I wanted to ask you, have you read the poem The Idea of Order at Key West by Wallace Stevens?
No. The Idea of Order by Wallace Stevens.
The Idea of Order
I will read it.
At Key West.
Well, Order in Key West, that's got an oxymoron. Okay. But
Are there
yes, sir.
any contemporary groups of musicians that you enjoy listening to?
Temporary groups now? Yeah, the Alabama Shakes. Love the Alabama Shakes, you know. I was down in New Orleans. There's, Melanie, what's Daria and the Hipsters?
Daria and the Hip Drops.
Daria and the Hip Drops. Yeah, we're working with them now. This is, you know, there's still great talent out there. You still got to get in front of the crowd. You got to get on that stage and then find yourself. And the good news is there are good little groups out there. Donovan Frankenheimer, you know, Jack Johnson was one. A white guy from Hawaii becomes the biggest selling artist in Hawaii. You know, who has a three-piece band and couldn't, you know, 20 labels turned him down. That stuff still happens, you know, and it's good because they are out there. And then your kids will tell you who's cool. If they're parrot heads, they will. And I always go to the shows and I go, what do y'all listen to? I mean, the great thing about it is our demographics are so young, people don't understand that. I mean, it's 5 generations now. So I go out there and I want to know, where do you go when you're not coming here? And that's who I listen to. Way in the back.
Hi, my name is Rachel. Do you have any advice for developing parakeets?
Do you have any advice for developing parakeets?
Development parakeets. Choose your outfits carefully, and thank your parents for raising you on this music. Say thank you very much. No, I'm just going to sit up here and do it. I don't think we need it. This is like back to basics, you know. Never forget to do this. So. I'm going to play some Paris-influenced songs for you. And I tell you, I'm going to slip out here. And First one is about a guitar I bought here down in Pigalle a couple of years ago and the song's called Rue de la Guitare. There's incredible areas like in Pigalle down there, and they call it Rue de la Guitare. And where there's music shops and music shops, you can still find great old instruments and amplifiers. And as a guitar player and a collector, I loved it. And I scored real big a couple of years ago. And so I found this little guitar in the window. It's a D18 Martin. She can't be here tonight. She's in customs. Kind of like me and Toulon a few years ago. But so this is one I'm walking through last year, a guitar store in Detroit. And I walk up, and here's a 1947 000 28 Martin sitting on the shelf, which I can't believe. And so I don't tell my Paris D18 this, but this is kind of my new favorite. So I'm going to play the song about the Paris guitar on the Detroit guitar, because I have no other option. And so we'll do this one first. It's called Rue de la Guitare. Sunday off in Gay Paris, headed for that sacred street. Got still the act up on Montmartre, Rue de la Guitare, Rue de la Guitare. Melodies that never fade, like B-girls who act masquerade. Pigalle is still a strange bazaar down on Rue de la Guitare, Rue de la Guitare. Windows filled with broken dreams, forgotten songs on a rusty string, from Nazareth across the somehow she caught up with me, perfect accompli. Lit the wood and felt the spark, heard the songs from Smoky Bar. Oh, you can never see what this meant to be. Toast to all the beer. AD-18 played Lightfoot clear. Music still lives down in the bar on Rue de la Guitare, Rue de la Guitare. Now over here, people say, comment ça va? Chanson à jouer, Rue de la Guitare, la bibliothèque. I know where I'm playing. You always have to make those little changes. Alright, so this is it. So we're doing La Cigala on Saturday and Sunday. And I loved it because I had a little apartment on Rue de Dragon off of Saint-Germain many years ago. And I used to work Bill Bouquet and street sing here when I was still selling out big shows in the States. But I wanted to make my mark here. And like I guess you figured out in the beginning, I'm kind of a determined person. And so in St. Bart's, I ran into my dear friend now, Gérard Drouot, who's GDP Productions, and he had a house in St. Bart's. And Kino, my dear friend, who's been with me forever, we were talking, and Gérard, you know, being a Frenchman, says, "But they don't know you." And I went, "Well, I don't care about that. They will." And so for those of you who have followed our escapades in Paris, we came in and played New Morning first time, and it was during the election, and Sarko had his offices down there, and then the ambassador, the American ambassador, wanted to come to the show. So we're in this little bar, you know, New Morning, and all of a sudden, the American security shows up, the Sarko campaign headquarters is down there, and the French people around going, "What in the hell is going on here?" And parrot heads and feathers showed up. Well, as a child of the Mardi Gras, you know, I had no problem with that, and you know, and the French love to dress up too. I love, you know, costumes are cool, and so from there we just kind of kept going and going, and you know, to the Olympia, and then, but La Cigale seems to be our home in Paris now. So, and I wrote this song so long ago before I'd ever come here, and it's one of the wishes I wanted to, and this was the inspiration was an old dear friend named Eddie Balchowski who fought in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade in the Spanish Civil War. Lost his arm and went back to Chicago, and he was the cleanup man in the club I played. And, he played one-hand piano at night when he'd get off work, and he and I spent a lot of time together. And so I kind of transformed it a little bit, and yeah, this is what it became. He went to Paris, looking for answers, questions that bothered him so. He was impressive, young and aggressive, saving the world on his own. One summer breezes, French wines and cheeses, put his ambitions in bed. Summers and winters, scattered like splinters, and 4 or 5 years slipped away. He went to England, played the piano, married an actress named Kim. They had a fine life, she was a good wife, bore him a young son named Jim. And all of the answers and all the questions he locked in his attic one day. He liked the quiet, clean country living, and 20 more years slipped away. Well, the war took his baby, bombs killed his lady, and left him with only one eye. His body was dead, his whole world was shattered, all he could do was just cry. While the tears were falling, he was calling answers he never found. So he hopped on a freighter, skidded the ocean, and left England without a sound. Now he lives in the islands, fishes the pylons, drinks that green label each day. Writing his memoirs, losing his hearing, but he don't care what most people say. 'Cause through 86 years of perpetual emotion, if he likes you, he'll smile, he'll say, Jimmy, some of it's magic, some of it tragic, but I had a good life all the way. Then he went to Paris, looking for answers to questions that bothered him so. Yeah, I know who, yeah. Larry Ledbetter from Mobile, Alabama. Are you still married to Larry?
He went to Paris looking for answers to questions that bothered him so.